10.5 years ago, I started making games. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to take a look back at the games I made in that time and give a little reflection on them. Going through every single game takes time. This isn't a comprehensive review of every game, just a quick blurb, a summary of my thoughts. Also, I've made a lot of things, many that barely constitute being games because they were either quickly abandoned or were only made for the purpose of learning, like a tutorial series. I'll be skipping most of these, with the exception of a few that I think are important. At some point in the future, I will talk more extensively about the wider picture of my game development journey and what it has been like, but for now, these are the games. Starting with a non-video game. This is the only one. The idea of the game is to pick cards with random prompts for you to imagine something brand new and then share it. The goal isn't to win so much as it is to flex your creative muscles. Nevertheless, it is a game and I gave it a point system. I made this game while on a long road trip and I played it with my grandma. I still have some of my entries from the time and it definitely reads a little like a video game wiki. The only reason I came up with this game was because a glitch in a recent Terraria iOS update prevented me from playing, and this was my alternative entertainment. This is not the first game I ever thought up conceptually, but this is the first game that I actually made, and then played. And these were the first video games I made. My first foray into game development was with this book, which taught me how to use QB64, a sort of modern version of BASIC. The book had several games within it, and I would type them out exactly as written. I've lost most of the projects I made, save for a copy-pasted piece of code that I put into a Pages document and let rot for the last 10 years. To my surprise, this document had 3 separate projects pasted into it, each almost exactly as written in the book, with the exception of the last 2 which have some mistakes hidden within that cause the game to either be too slow or too fast. This is my earliest Scratch game, which I made at an orientation for a kids coding camp. Scratch wasn't even what they taught at the camp, but it was an easy sell to make kids want to do the full week. It worked. This game is apparently based on Paceman, Ping Pong, and Kirby 2. The titular Mr. Magoo also looks vaguely like a Minecraft villager to me, and I doubt that's a coincidence. As far as being the first video game I designed, yeah, it's fine. I made a few other incomplete games at the same orientation, including Feed the People, a game about a waiter delivering food to the correct tables before time runs out. I didn't get very far, because I didn't know how to program it, but it's suspiciously similar to a later project of mine, which is interesting, because until a few weeks ago when I recovered my old account, I had completely forgotten I ever made this game. There are a few games on here like that. It was quite weird finding them and having the memory flood right back. Another game from that day, barely functional, but I thought it was notable because it has a full intro cutscene. Look at that. This was a bit of a surreal find when going through the archives. It's a numbers go up game about buying snakes that I made for my mom. We owned several ball pythons at the time, which is probably what inspired it. The game is incomplete, but there's movement, a fully working Driob counter, and even different rooms. It's kind of weird seeing this and being reminded of just how all over the place my games were when I first started, before I sort of settled into... Speaking of which, I don't have much to say about this one, but it's a complete game, so it's here. I thought the idea of a guy watching your food was funny, so I made a game where a guy watches your food. I also have a vague memory of a teacher in my elementary school seeing me work on it and saying, "That's amazing, we should have a class teaching this stuff." I hope I made an impact. This was made during the actual course that I had the orientation for. Despite it not being a course about Scratch, I used Scratch a lot during the breaks. The sprites come from a little animation I had made, and I think I only made the game because I wanted an excuse to show off the Mario 64 Game Over screen. One of those, can you believe this was in a kid's game sort of things. I was super proud of this game when I made it. Retrospectively, I still am. I used RNG and a proto-state machine, despite not even knowing what that was. The enemy would switch between different states, including pointing in a random direction, flying, or attacking the player. And although it's certainly not convincingly smart, it's a pretty tough fight. While at that week-long coding camp, I saw some other kid in the class struggling to make a maze game, and I wanted to see if I was better than them. Not to tell them, just for my own ego. And I guess I was, because I did it. And gee, I wonder how I did that spotlight effect. This was based on 2 games. One was one of those games where you throw a knife into spinning objects, like Flippy Knife Hit. And the other was the Pen Pineapple Apple Pen mobile game. I don't know. There's also a jump scare if your knife gets too close to the pineapple. At some point, I had the idea for a game called Little Man Sam, which was basically a top-down Zelda game, except that I had never played a top-down Zelda game. This project is probably the farthest I got with the idea, but it wasn't my only attempt at the idea. Truth is, I really wanted to make 3D games, and since I couldn't yet, I was very interested in all the ways one might fake 3D. I recall seeing a project using layers of stamps to make a 3D character, which I then took and upgraded using my own approach with the intent of making a fake 3D version of Little Man Sam. I even made a video explaining the technique to send to my dad.
It goes up, and then it will switch its costume to whatever that number is, and will switch its coordinates to whatever that number is.
While I continued to reuse the technique on occasion, I took it no further in the case of Little Man Sam. Alright, so, there was a kid in one of my classes who would regularly quote the "I'm a giraffe" vine, call himself Sir Wigglesworth I, and talk about how much he loved onion rings. One day, I offered to make a game to consolidate these things into one central vision. If I recall, his reaction when he saw the finished game was, "Cool." He later confessed that at the time he thought I was special. Oh well. One of the things I remember having fun with was the off-screen scrolling. I don't know about now, but at the time, there was a limit to how far an object was allowed to go off-screen. That became very obvious when an object was quite big. This led me to split the mountain into multiple parts so that I could fully animate it sliding in and leaving. There is a bit of a pop though. Since I made my video about remaking the game, a number of people have come back to the original and remixed it to make it their own, which is just awesome.
My organs hurt.
This was an attempt at a Mother's Day gift, a horse racing game probably inspired by the cow racing game in We Play, though I didn't work on it very long before I got a different idea for Mother's Day. But before that, a racing game! A 3D car on a 2D track. Recognize that 3D? I wanted to make this a full-fledged multiplayer racing game, but I got as far as this. This was my Mother's Day game. I'd asked my mom what I should make a game about, and she said a unicorn. A theme and a deadline, almost like a game jam. Of course, making a game about a unicorn just meant that the main character was going to be a unicorn. I was going to make a platformer, because that's what I really wanted to do anyway. Most of this was just a prototype for another game that I wanted to make, including the start of some kind of sad backstory for level 2 that I never finished. And this is it. This is another game that I had high hopes for. I had a whole story planned out in my head. The character is separated from his world by a black hole, sent across time and space, and is trying to find a way to send a message back. Believe it or not, this was before I ever saw Interstellar. I guess my ideas are just on that level. At the time, I really wanted to make this a full, proper game, and pursuing what I perceived to be a lesser version in Scratch felt like a waste of time. In hindsight, I should have just made it. Oh well. As I was going through making these games and experiments, I had a few ideas for real games that I wanted to make. Game ideas that motivated me to keep going. But at this point, nothing excited me quite as much as Alternate. A game, nay, a franchise that I spent a lot of time thinking about. And Alternate Wars was a side game that I started working on in Scratch. No idea what the goal was, which is probably why I didn't get very far. This was my first multiplayer game. Shared keyboard, of course. I think I maybe envisioned some kind of Fire Boy and Water Girl type game, but this is as far as I got. It's also becoming clear that I really liked stars. This was an attempt at making my own version of Terraria, complete with multiplayer and world generation. I think I gave up when I couldn't figure out how to make the world generate faster. Such a dumb technique. This was another real game idea I had. Top-down, atmospheric, semi-horror exploration RPG where you are a small robot-piloted spaceship exploring abandoned space stations. Another project left unfinished, but also another project I put a great deal of thought into.
Let's work on this. Yay.
I spent a number of months trying and failing to learn Unreal Engine, and during that time I followed a tutorial that produced this little project, the closest I ever got to making Lorenzo and Reef as I'd imagined it. Back in Scratch, I was making this game, my first defense-style game. The goal here is pretty simple, don't let the zombies get to the generator. I didn't finish this game, which is too bad because I kinda like the art style I was going for. I wish I had more to say about this game, but the truth is, I think I just kind of made it. The first game I ever made where I intended to make it under time constraints. I gave myself 2 hours, and then of course was left with quite a buggy project, so I went back in and fixed it up. I consider this my first complete game at the time. Shifting goalposts, it will happen again. One effect that I was particularly proud of was the wavering glow from the candlelight onto the tables. I still think this is a solid little game for just a few hours of work. This is a random little game that I made while testing out a web browser on my iPad mini that apparently could run the Scratch editor pretty well. It doesn't look like much, but it's actually a solid little game. You move the ball, you dodge the arrows, and every time the main arrow hits a wall, it clones itself. I made this for a school assignment. I got a little carried away with the scope, making music and working on cutscenes, and in the end I had to rush some things. My goal was to retell the whole story of Beowulf, a new telling, in RPG form. When it became clear that I was going to have to abridge some things, I decided to go for a more comedic route. I think I managed to get part of the story across, and even made a basic and unlosable fight sequence at the end. I remember really liking the music I made for this section. The very end track was provided by one of my classmates named Harley. Very unfinished, very basic, but I put my all into this, and I appreciate that. Another school project. It was some kind of humanities/history class sort of thing, where we learned about the Vikings, and I used that as an excuse to make a game. I had fun making this. It's basically Tank Trouble, although I didn't know about that game till years later. The game cycles between random levels, and there's a time limit in which you try to get the highest score. It's another one that I wanted to turn into something bigger. I even made some drawings and Blender models for a hypothetical 3D version of the game. I remember having fun playing this with my friend, although I don't think he had as much fun as I did. The issues it has are in the name, but I still think it could be fun to remake it someday. This was my attempt at a sequel, and I don't know, it just doesn't quite hit like the first. I can definitely see what I was going for, something different here, just not quite sure what. I do like the little guy with the cannon on his head though. My final school project, at least for a class that wasn't programming related. We were studying religions. I was assigned Hinduism, and for one of the projects, I decided to make a version of the shell game with the goddess Parvati as the host, with chalices and a die with the Om on it. I also made some vaguely Eastern sounding music in GarageBand. It's neat, I guess. I remember struggling to get the shuffle system to work, so I'm glad I figured that out. This game was made over the course of a week during another game development camp. During the first week, we were introduced to some game dev tools and to one another, and in the second week, we were divided into teams and tasked with making a game. Since a number of attendees had prior experience using GameMaker, most groups ended up making 2D games. But I'd spent the last year learning to use Blender and was itching to do something in 3D. Luckily for me, there were just enough interested people to make up a full team. We had a theme, something along the lines of games that help or educate or something. There might have been an environmental flair. I proposed the idea of an infinite runner game where you're a penguin sliding down a melting iceberg while avoiding trash in the water. Something exciting but simple. The idea the team decided on, however, was a horror game containing every phobia in existence in order to help people face their fears. The game was in a very broken state the night before our presentation, so I took the project up to my room, pulled an all-nighter trying to figure out Unity, made this project while following a tutorial, and got the game into a playable state last minute. My first real 3D game! Hooray! The game's not great, but it got me to start using Unity, which was an important step for me. Over the next few months, I followed more tutorials and made more games. The furthest I got during this time was a Brachy's tower defense game, which I worked on during a programming class in school. This is my last Scratch game, or at least my last attempt at one. I wanted to make a city you could drive around and do things in, reminiscent of the first GTA. At the time, I was really struggling to get the hang of Unity, and Scratch was my retreat. An easy victory, a little reminder that I did know how to make things, even if I never finished them. This was my first attempt at a 3D platformer, with animations and jumping. Though I know I didn't have big ambitions for this game, or I wouldn't have made the character look like that. This game was another ram at the door of trying to understand Unity. I didn't break through, but it did help, and it kept me driven. At some point in school, I was forced to learn Python, so I made a very light text RPG where you choose a weapon and then fight a goblin. It was a pretty basic game, but with the help of time.sleep and some nicely formatted strings, it looked pretty convincing. I made a couple other Python projects, but this is the only one that actually resembles a game. And this is my second attempt at programming a 3D platformer. Not much else to say, other than it feels nicer than Runman Test. Major Basil was another big idea I had that involved a highly intelligent dinosaur trying to break out of a laboratory. It was third person, and you would fight with claws, teeth, and guns. The idea was pretty much Half-Life meets Jurassic Park, but you're the dinosaur. Pretty sure games like that already exist, but it sounded pretty sick at the time. Still does. Although I think Dino Blade fulfills a similar kind of fantasy. Another third-person platformer that I worked on in school. This was really just a playground for learning new things. It has slightly better controls, a working camera, an obstacle course, and even an enemy with basic pathfinding behavior. This game represents a turning point for me. Up till now, I've been pursuing these big game ideas I wasn't ready for, just because I was finally using an engine that I knew could do it. But here I said, just make something simple and complete it. Menus, sound, music, particles, and overcomplicated scoring system. It's all here. This is the first project I ever released on itch, and it helped me knock down the expectations I had for my first real finished game. See how I keep doing that? It's a Pong clone. I called it Bonts for One because I was worried about being sued for using the word Pong, and For One because it's the 41st game in the series. This was my first time participating in an online game jam, GMTK 2020. The original idea for the game was that you were an assistant going back and forth between an office and a cafe to buy coffee for your boss. But every time you make the trip, there's some new crazy event going on in the city for you to navigate like an obstacle course. By the end of the jam, the game was a generic platformer with the gimmick that the longer you go without coffee, the lower energy you get, so you have to make it between checkpoints as efficiently as you can. The theme was out of control. Out of control because the city was getting out of control, and then out of control because when you get to 0%, you can no longer control the character. To this day, I kind of like how this game looks. I made all the models and the sprites and put it all together in just 2 days. Good for me. This was my second Game Jam game. The theme was Rewind, so I made a puzzle platformer where in each level some kind of event or thing happens, and the way to get through it is to rewind events at the right time to get to the goal. The way it works is by animating everything and then playing the animation backwards when the button is held. It's far from a polished game, but it's a neat concept with a lot more to offer than what I was able to give it at the time. My third Game Jam game and the first game that I made a devlog on, so you can find that if you'd like. It was also my second first-person game. I think I spent most of this jam making models, but it was fun. I remember finishing the project at school the morning of the deadline, very tired, but very accomplished. This was for the Brackeys 2021.1 Game Jam with the theme Stronger Together. So I made a game where you move around these lights whose brightness gets stronger the closer they are together. You need the lights to traverse the level because if the player goes out into the dark, they die. Some things require a ton of light and some things require as little light as possible. This game turned out way better than I thought it would. There's still more that I would have liked to do, of course, but I was able to implement a number of key ideas I had, which was cool. I don't know why I name half these things the way I do, but this was a little game that I really didn't even mean to develop as much as I did. I was just playing around with sprites, 2D lights, and enemy AI, and ended up making this Vampire Survivors looking thing. I'm actually quite fond of the pixel art here. Although I tried to set up VR projects before, this was my first time actually successfully making something. I don't remember much from working on it, but according to the comprehensive journal I kept in school, it was pretty standard. Struggling with VR, struggling with Unity, struggling with the combination. I didn't really have a goal or anything here, so I just messed around and knocked over chairs. At some point, I got bored of working on the VR game and decided to make some projects just using C#. I followed some tutorials, then went off on my own to start making games. I made each of these games exclusively using built-in libraries and a single file because I didn't know any better. First, a little top-down dungeon crawler that could be controlled by 2 people. Second, a more advanced top-down dungeon crawler with an inventory, keys, doors, and a moving NPC. Making these projects was really fun. All IDE, no visual editor. It made me feel like I was a real programmer. It's cool looking back at the code and seeing how insistent I was on keeping it clean despite having no idea how to properly organize it. Not that I'm much better now. I had this static class called Atlas that was in charge of pretty much everything. And update all classes. What a method. It's like an update method, but with 2 more words. This game is the most important game I have ever made, but I can't explain why right now, so I'll just say it was really fun to make, and I have thought a lot about it, and I have a prototype for a new and improved version of it that I really want to put more time into someday, when I feel ready. Renaissance was my first project made in Godot. Not quite true. I made 2 before it, aptly titled First Godot Game and Second Godot Game, but they are both empty because I made them, started watching tutorials, and then got bored and did other stuff. With this game, I actually did some stuff. I started to figure out how Godot's node system works, I added labels with code to change them, I did not know method naming conventions, wow, and I made a very basic third-person controller. At this point, I did not have any plans to use Godot as my primary tool of game development, I just wanted to try it out and see what it was like. A game for a jam with a theme joined together, where you join together these weird orbs in order to make bridges and vehicles to navigate the level. I later found out this game can be cheesed pretty easily, but I still think it's fun to play around with. This is definitely one of my favorite looking games that I've made. It has a weird feel to it that I appreciate. During the summer, I put a lot of time into simultaneously working on Unity while also learning Godot and Unreal Engine with C++. This meant following tutorials, making junk, and starting work on a sequel to Bots for One intended to get me through the hurdle of learning Godot. I did not end up finishing it, but I did learn a little more about Godot's UI, physics, and sound effects. Then another jam game, and another of my favorite looking games. I wanted to make a 3D game that looked kind of like an 80s DOS game, and while I don't think I quite nailed that look, I like what became of it. The game was also inspired by this oniric idea I had of a game where you wander around a city by the beach with a vaporwave style. It's not a particularly fun game, but I do like how it looks. Another jam game, and the last game that I finished in Unity. It was made for a game jam with the theme of Let There Be Chaos, and this game was a high point for me in my learning. It was made in less than a week, but looks cool, is quite polished by my standards, and is kind of fun to play, if unbalanced. I think it's one of the coolest things that I've made in that short of a time. Though maybe not the coolest. You'll see. Or you already know, whatever. I originally made this game in order to participate in the Stop Waiting for Godot game jam, but realized that I did not have the time nor ability to actually make a game before the deadline. So instead, this became a playground for me to learn how to make better 3D movement. That, and to follow a Mrs.'s shader tutorial. This project, and my ability to make a movement script that met my standards, is what finally convinced me to dive fully into Godot and give it a real chance. This is the single project that I have put the most time into. 150 hours. That may not sound like much. This game really helped me learn Godot and the differences between it and Unity. Outside of sheer time spent, this is the most complete game I've ever made. And yet, I find it reassuring to visit because when I look at it, I can see a lot that I could do better. Not will, but could. Fun fact, there's a secret level in this game called Garbage that I use to check for dependency errors, because when I first started working on this game, it was full of them. Another remake to test my Godot skills. I just sort of finished high school when I made this game, and immediately the devlog got a lot of attention, and it set high spirits for the rest of the year. Something I never mentioned in this devlog is how lucky I am that I exported 2 versions of the background song when I first made the game. The first was a gamey synth instrument made for the original game, and the second was the higher quality grand piano for the remake. That original GarageBand file is long gone though. I just so happened to have exported 2 versions at the time that I made it 8 years ago. Clearly it was meant to be remade. This is a project I started working on for the Brackies 2022.1 Game Jam with the theme of It Is Not Real, but never finished. The idea, at least according to some mad ramblings I came across in the project folder, was that you play as a ghost in a family home. Every family member has a routine that they go through, and your goal is to disrupt each person's routine without getting caught. Once you've made it impossible for a member of the family to complete any task, they would realize they are in a simulation and would cease to exist. You would do this with every family member until they were all gone. Then, with nothing left for you to do, you would cease to exist. Not the character, you. I didn't get very far for a number of reasons. The key one being that I had another game jam coming up, and I figured that if I didn't finish this game before that started, I probably wouldn't care enough to come back to it after. And I was right. Said upcoming game jam, the Great Spring Game Jam hosted by Goodgis. The theme was just spring, so I made a game about a bee inspired by Mario Galaxy's Bee Power-Up. This was my first finished third-person 3D platformer, defining finished as released and not, finished. Third-person 3D platformers are one of my favorite genres, and, as you may have guessed, one of the things I was most excited to make when I started game development. So this was pretty cool for me. My buddy did a number of speedruns in the weeks after I'd released the game and tried submitting the page for approval on speedrun.com. Unfortunately, his application was rejected. Why? Because it turns out the page already existed, with several times already posted. First game of mine to have that happen, so that's pretty cool. The game is janky, but kind of satisfying. The visuals were actually my attempt at realism. HDRIs, materials with all sorts of texture inputs, and lots of shine. Both Godot and I struggled to make it work at the time, but for a game made in 12 hours, I'll take it. Another project that I started but hardly spent any time on. There was a VR game jam coming up, and I wanted to use this as practice since I'd never made a VR game in Godot, but also maybe turn it into a full game. The idea for this game was basically ATV Off-Road Fury, a goofy ATV simulation game for the PS2, but in VR. I still kind of want to make this eventually, but not until I figure out how to enjoy working with vehicle physics and VR. Speaking of which, my first complete VR game made for a VR game jam. A game that was originally supposed to be entirely different before I pivoted. When I made that original devlog, I don't think I put enough emphasis on just how frustrating it is, or at least was, to develop a VR game. Not on the engine side, setup was very smooth, but actually working on the game. The annoyance of clicking play, taking off my headphones, taking off my glasses, putting on the headset, adjusting, sliding on the controllers, adjusting, waiting for them to turn on because they had gone to sleep, spending 2 seconds actually testing the thing I wanted to test, and then going through those steps in reverse order to make a change and then start the cycle over again. That, or having the world's heaviest ski goggles pressed against my forehead while I squint at the monitor trying to debug. I also had issues with the controllers tracking and connecting, which made development even slower. Then, the issue of where to put the headset, plugging in the controllers, getting tangled in wires, just not fun. That's the real reason why most of this game's development was done outside of VR, and why the game didn't have anything that actually benefited from being in VR. But hey, it looks pretty good. This was my first finished 2D game in Godot. In some ways, it's one of the least creative, but in other ways, my most polished. It's one of very few games I've made where I didn't get so bogged down by the concept that I didn't have time to make levels. Not that I nailed it or anything, but it was kind of freeing to be working with such a simple, familiar concept. I didn't need to wrap my mind around designing for a brand new mechanic. I knew the rules. The game is also my most popular? And for a while it had a solid speedrunning community going. It's one of my favorite games for that alone. Getting positive comments on devlogs is cool, but nothing beats seeing someone actually play a game I made. And not just once, over and over again, perfecting it. It's amazing. I recently went back through the comments to collect and categorize all the feedback with the hopes that I can use it to build upon what I did. More on that in the hopefully near future. I don't have a lot to say about this one that wasn't said in the devlog. It's a pretty basic game, almost an idle game. A Minecraft wheat farming simulator, really. This is one of those odd little games I made just for me. Pretty much a zero consideration for what others thought. It's really more of an art exhibit than a game, and I like it, even if it's not very good gameplay-wise. This is an unfinished VR game about delivering pizzas from your hang glider. I don't know if I'll ever finish this game because it has caused me a lot of grief, both on the programming and VR side, but I certainly want to make a video about it because I learned a lot of important things from my time spent on this. And I have spent a lot of time on this. It's a project that I've regularly returned to every few months over the last 2.5 years, and I despise it. I love this game. Development had its ups and downs, but I love how it turned out. It's a game that was a big idea in my head that I decided to simplify for my own sanity, except in the end, I made the big idea anyway. I regretted it at the time, but I love it now, especially that little spider. Sound the alarm! It's another remake. While some people have said they prefer the look of the original, I don't. This game was really just an excuse for me to learn more about Godot while still having something to show for it. I did a lot of things that I wasn't sure I'd be able to do, and I had a lot of fun doing it. Regardless of the result, this was a good time, and a good reminder that sometimes you learn more from remaking something than making something new. I don't know, it's a proverb or something. This is a little slice of what became of Lies of Descent. It's a prototype that I've worked on occasionally over the last few years, and it's fun. As in to play, it's really fun. This project still drives me forward, and I would be prioritizing this game right now, if not for two things. One, I want this game to have a very particular sort of soundtrack, and I'm not good enough at making music yet, and I don't want to hire someone because I think I'd make their life a living hell. And two, it's quite a big project, and I'm afraid of failing it. I want to try and potentially fail on something smaller before I put everything into this. I'm very excited to make this game though, and I look forward to sharing more when I'm closer to being ready. See last devlog. Though I should re-clarify once again that although I will pursue this game, it is not my top priority, and you may not hear about it for quite a while. I have some cool ideas for it, and I will add an actual basketball hoop in the game at some point. Can't promise a whole mode though. Fun as Forklift League would be, I don't know that I have that in me, certainly not right now, and I want this thing to be small. I must have been in a bad place when I made this game. It's bad. The theme for the game jam was aberration. So, in the game, you look for issues with items on the conveyor belt and perform different actions to fix them. I didn't have the energy to make a cool looking conveyor belt, and I didn't even bother to make a devlog. So, there you go. This game bummed me out. I learned some interesting things while working on this game, but ultimately everything kind of fizzled out after the jam ended. The game was supposed to be a real-time strategy, tower defense sort of game, but I had to reduce my scope significantly for the jam. I think I was still a little disappointed about changing the whole game idea after the jam, so I did the bare minimum to make it presentable, made a video, and moved on. I started this for the 2024 GMTK Jam with the theme Built to Scale. It was supposed to be a sort of geometric puzzle game where you play as a cube that can scale itself to overcome obstacles. I never got the rotation system working quite right though, and thus the game never went far. You can almost see what it was trying to be, but I didn't get there. This is definitely a game I could go back and finish though. I need to adjust some things, but I see this as totally possible now. Not as a big game, but as a finished game. I don't know, we'll see. My most recent remake, and a remake of something I didn't originally make, and another great learning opportunity. UI, sprite work, low poly, and vertex painting. I spent so much time testing this game that I ended up memorizing the minimum required lines for every solution and had essentially solved the game. That's why I added in time as part of the score. Solid, polished product, even look at the itch page. This is my most recently released game, and despite its lack of reception, it's one of my favorites. This is a game where I got really fixated on the concept, but also was able to focus on design and polish. Though having Sugar Sugar as a bit of a blueprint, since this was an homage, certainly helped inform some of my design decisions. I really wanted to expand upon this game after release, but given that I have no idea how to market or advertise it, and the fact that the people I showed it to generally didn't seem to like it, I decided that it would probably be best to just move on. Still, I personally love the result, and therefore feel confident categorizing this as another one for me sort of game. In the last quarter of the year, I started working on another game that I planned on making my first Steam-released game, but put it aside when I ran across some physics-related issues that I didn't feel confident I could solve yet. And then I started working on a game which I really can see being my first Steam game, and I'll share more on that when I'm certain. For now, that's that. So, 10.5, nearly 11 years. A common trend I've noticed across most of these games is that while there's certainly variety, there's also a lack of depth, which says to me that I need to spend more time on the content side of games, which is one of my priorities for my next project, and quite frankly, something I want to focus on with all of my big projects. 10 years sounds like a long time, but it's gone by fast, and I doubt the next 10 will feel any slower. There's been a lot of time spent floundering, frustrated that I couldn't do more, and there was a lot of daydreaming. A little bit of dreaming is good, but I really want to do some great things, make some great games, and hopefully, some successful ones too. Anyway, here's to 10. Clink. Ciao for now.